Hey everyone, welcome to Mr. Geopolitics. This is September the 10th, and we're going to be talking about all of the latest developments in Ukraine. I just put out a longer video, just over 20 minutes, but for all of you guys who don't want to watch a video that long, I'm just going to quickly go over what has happened in Ukraine recently. So, in the Kharkiv region, the Ukrainians have liberated almost 6,000 square kilometers now. If we look at this map, it shows you basically it's almost 6,000 square kilometers, and that happened in 3 days. This is another map, this one by Rybar. The last one was by Suryak. Suryak, he's on Twitter, Suryak Maps, at Suryak Maps. Anyway, this is by Rybar, who's on Telegram. Yeah, we can see on this map how the Ukrainians came in from the west. They took Balaklia, they took Shenchenkov, then they went towards Kupiansk, and they basically took the river, split the Russian forces in two. And then, because the Russians were also at that point facing a threat from the east, because the Oskil River here, which separates the Kharkiv region from the Luhansk region, the Oskil River, it goes south and then it swerves to the east, and it turns into the Seversky Donets River. And the Ukrainians have already crossed the Seversky Donets. They don't have. They have a little bridgehead here, but you notice all of this area isn't colored in blue because it's basically all forests. And as we know, forests are excellent for defenders to hide in and to ambush their enemy. So if the Russians are smart, if they are hiding out in these forests, it might not be an easy task for the Ukrainians. But anyways, back to my point. Because there was the threat that the Ukrainians could take Liman, the village of Liman, and at that point, the Ukrainians were just taking territory left and right, and the Russians thought that maybe we've already been cut off from the northwest and south pretty much, so they might, if they can just do the same thing, take Liman and come up to the river, come up to the Oskil River at the east, will be encircled. And that was the largest Russian garrison in Izium. So they decided to retreat to the safety of their own territory. Anyways, now the only question is, can the Ukrainians continue replicate what they did in Kharkiv? I mean, they're on a roll now, but can they replicate it? Can they continue? Because now they're up against two rivers, and river crossings are always dangerous because, I mean, let's say they cross the river partially, let's say a quarter of their forces cross the river. Maybe a quarter because maybe the Russians, because we know that the Ukrainians had 15 to 25,000 troops here. We know that in Izium, and in this entire region, the Russians didn't even have, maybe they had 5,000 or less. So they were outnumbered more than 3 to 1. Now, the Russians could very well be setting up defensive lines, trenches in this area west of the Oskil River. And they could actually be preparing for the possibility that the Ukrainians could cross. And if they cross, it's very unlikely they'll let all of them cross. They'll probably let a certain amount cross that they believe they can handle, that they believe they can encircle and quickly destroy. So that's why I said 25%. So Who knows, maybe 25%, 30%, half of them will cross. Then the Russians might blow the bridges. Ukrainians are stranded. And then the Russians might just surround them and completely annihilate them. Pound them with artillery, airstrike, rockets, and just surround them. And, when they have their back against the river, it's basically, that's about it. There's not much you can do, right? So that's the danger of river crossings. It's the same thing here where when we're dealing with, see this area in blue right here is what the Ukrainians control, Stary Caravan, Ozern. But you always have to be reluctant with river crossings, because if you cross the river and the enemy destroys the bridge or the bridges, then you're in a kind of precarious situation, right? What do you do, right? So that's the problem the Ukrainians face. According to some reports, there are 5,000 Ukrainian troops ready to cross the river and take Liman. But some people think that might be a diversion, and the Ukrainians really want to go for Lysychansk. Today there was some word that the Ukrainian troops were outside of Lysychansk, but that was over 20 hours ago. And Lysychansk and Severodonetsk, if you recall, it took Russia over a month to take these two cities. These are two twin cities. It took Russia a month of fighting street to street, house to house to take them. But the only question is, will the Russians put up that kind of a fight? Because in the Kharkiv region, they didn't put up a fight, right? They really didn't put up a fight. They just basically fled. They retreated. You can call it a tactical retreat if you want, whatever you want to call it. They just fled. Another issue is that a lot of the civilians that collaborated with the Russians, worked with the Russians, received Russian passports, that thought the Russians were going to stay there for good, they're now fleeing and have fled the region. But some of them, because of how quickly this happened, some of them have obviously been captured, and if they disappear and they're never seen again, don't be surprised. Who knows, some of them might end up in court, but don't expect a fair trial, and if they disappear, don't be surprised. That's just the reality of the situation, right? Reprisals can be brutal. So anyways, in the rest of Ukraine, everything is more or less stable on the Kherson front. The Ukrainians, it's really, really slow going. They've taken this village, Vysokopilia. Here the Ukrainians haven't been able to make any headway since they've crossed the river, but the Russians the Ukrainians keep crossing, setting up pontoon bridges, crossing, sending reinforcements, and then the Russians will blow up the pontoon bridges, and they'll pound the Ukrainian forces, who are then stranded, with artillery, airstrikes, rockets. They just pound them relentlessly until they reduce them, and then the Ukrainians send more reinforcements. And this has happened a few times, and it's like a little mini cauldron, but I don't know, the Ukrainians are not giving up. Then over here we have a few hamlets that have changed hands. Ternovi Poti changed hands a few times. Now the Ukrainians have taken it and made a little created a little bulge here, but they've taken these two little settlements. But these settlements are not even villages. They're what you call a hamlet. They're hamlets, so they're really tiny, and yeah, that's about it. So they could change hands at any time. In the Zaporizhia region, Zaporizhia nuclear power plant has been shut down for good because the Ukrainians keep pounding it with artillery. and rockets and whatnot. And some Russian pundits are upset. They're saying, hey, why don't we retaliate? Why don't we? Because this has caused blackouts in this town. And the Ukrainians are saying, why don't we shut off the power in Kiev? Why don't we destroy the electrical grid in Zaporizhia and Kryvyi Rih, right? Why don't we reciprocate? But the Russians have not done that so far. This part of Zaporizhia, the Russians have taken this territory in blue in the last few days, but this little town of Velika Novosilka is surrounded by rivers. And yeah, the Russians haven't made any headway since taking this territory, because rivers are always difficult, right? You can cross them, the enemy can blow the bridge, and then there's only a few kilometers, a few miles separating the Russians from encircling this little town. But I don't know, it might also be a manpower deficiency issue, because the Russians are suffering from a manpower deficiency problem. They just don't have enough manpower. They have 170,000 troops to cover all this territory, which adds up to like something like 800, 900 kilometers, right? If we measure it out very roughly, but if we measure it out, yeah, it's about 800, 900 kilometers, 170,000 troops. The US, when they invaded Iraq, after bombing it for 12 years, and Iraq didn't have help from NATO, by the way, after that, when the US invaded, they had 370,000 troops, so not 170,000, 370,000 troops, right? So an extra 200,000 troops, and they were dealing with a front that was about 200, 300 kilometers wide. So the front the Americans were dealing with was something like this. That's how wide it was, because most of Iraq is deserts anyways. They just went up the highways, right? So the Russians are dealing with 4 times the length. Their front is 4 times as long as Iraq, the length, the front the Americans were dealing with in 2003. And the issue is that they have 200,000 less troops, and they can't use the Air Force because of Ukrainian air defenses, which are being directed by U.S. intelligence, right? The AWACS planes, the NATO AWACS planes, satellite intelligence, they tell the Ukrainians where and when the Russian jets are, when they're coming, how many, and so that way the Ukrainians don't have to have their radar turned on, so that way the Russians have a hard time tracking down the air defense units. They just pop out of nowhere, launch missiles, and then go hide again. So because of that, the Russians can't use their Air Force in an optimal way. Anyways, one other thing I will mention. In Europe, I've heard the price of natural gas has gone up something like, in some countries, 8 times. So that would mean last year if people paid $100 a month, now they're paying $800. And there's some protest people. Some people are boycotting, paying. Some people are burning their bills. And I think a week ago or so we saw a protest in Prague, 70,000 people. But that might only be the beginning. I mean, a lot of so far the governments in the EU have dismissed those protesters as Russian brainwashed Russian supporters, but I mean, paying 8 times as much for your electricity bill is no joke. So if this war continues, not the US, but the EU countries might start pressuring Ukraine to put it to an end. Because, in this latest offensive in Kharkiv, we saw a lot of Humvees, we saw a lot of M113s, we saw a lot of tanks that have been provided by Poland. So the question is, how much more Soviet type weapons do the Europeans have to give the former Soviet states that are not part of NATO? I mean, they're going to run out of Soviet weapons eventually, right? And then that would require training, and training can take months and even years. It requires infrastructure. It requires people that are trained to maintain the said weapons, or let's say tanks or artillery systems and whatnot. So, anyways, the EU, the pressure is building up, piling up on them. I mean, there isn't even enough natural gas to fulfill the EU's needs. There isn't in the world. There's LNG, but that's not enough. There's not enough out there, and it costs several times as much, because you have to take the natural gas, turn up the temperature, make it cold enough so that it turns to a liquid. Then you have to transport that liquid in a special ship. Then you have to turn it back, have a special facility turn it back into gas, and then use it. Whereas the natural gas from Russia just pumps directly into Europe. Anyways, guys, that's I'm gonna put an end to this. That's it for today, and thank you for watching, and please like and subscribe, share, comment, and I will see you in the next one.